Welcome to the award-winning Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, the learning velocity company. In a world moving at the pace of AI, each episode brings you practical ideas and real experiences from industry experts to help your people learn with the speed, relevance, and quality that drive real performance. Okay, welcome to episode 3 of the Learning Velocity Sessions, the grand finale. I'm your host, Michael Thiel. Now, in episodes 1 and 2, we talked about why learning velocity matters and how it's built. Today, we're getting into the part that people don't talk about enough. The human side, the leader side, the stuff that can accelerate everything or shut it down. And I've got the perfect duo with me. Nic Girvan, our leadership and inclusion powerhouse, and Dr. Cheryl Jackson, our resident change whisperer. Nic and Cheryl, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to do this.
Always a good time when we get to be with you, Michael.
Yes, you two are longtime friends of the show, and I appreciate you being here. You know, we're talking about the Learning Velocity Guide today. I've given it a careful read. It's worth a download, listeners, if you haven't checked it out yet, so please do so. But okay, I'm going to make a couple assumptions here. Now, from reviewing your contributions to the Learning Velocity Guide, it seems that, Nic, your perspective is that L&D has to help people grow beyond what AI can automate. And Dr. Cheryl, on your side, my perspective was that you're saying that AI is just the next chapter in a long trajectory of tech-driven change. So I'm curious, how do these two ideas line up? Nic, let's start with you.
Yeah, and I'd actually say that Cheryl's focus about acknowledging that AI is sitting at sort of a long arc of technology-driven change really matters. But it's important that we remember that this isn't the first time that technology has disrupted our world. You know, many organizations have staff who have lived through the introduction of computers and the internet and emails. And of course, these people have been adapting and recalibrating and getting on with it for decades. They've survived it all. I guess the thing that's different this time is, of course, the speed and the capability of the technology. So, as AI is becoming more powerful, it's really easy for us as humans to hand over that thinking rather than developing it. And I'd say that's why it's so very essential that we treat the AI adoption as a behavioral shift as much as a technological one. The human side isn't less important. It's actually even more of a need. If we think of things like judgment and critical thinking and sense making, and my favorite, lived experience, these are all the human value adds that AI can't deliver on, but people can. So coming back to my belief around L&D needing to evolve, this is absolutely why. We need training teams to stop trading people to compete with AI because I'll be honest, it's a race we can't win. So, what we should be doing is helping people evolve alongside it, deliberately strengthen the capabilities that AI can't offer, how we think, how we interpret information, how we make decisions when things aren't that clear. You know, the shift that we need, and something I talk about a lot, is for leaders to move away from valuing people for what they do towards valuing them for how they think. You know, if leaders continue to just value their team for what they're doing right now, they're going to really risk pigeonholing that talent to a skill that may not exist next year. If, however, they can be taught to harness how their team are thinking, that's where we really start to benefit from the experience, the insights, the brilliant brains, and the learning that they've achieved en route. So I'd say that's very much the bridge between Cheryl's perspective and mine. Performance today can't just be about execution. It has to be about creating opportunities where that human value add is going to make that change successful.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I really love how you frame that transformation is about valuing how people think, not just what they do, because from a change perspective, that's actually the through line across the last 20 years. So AI feels new, and in many ways it is, But when I zoom out, I see it as part of this long arc of technology driven change where stability has been shrinking and adaptation has become the new dependable feature, what we can count on, the consistency. And what's different this time is that AI doesn't just change the tools or the workflows, it's going after that judgment and expertise and identity that individuals have typically held very dear, and that's what I bring to the table. This is who I am and how I contribute to the world in a meaningful way. And in earlier transformations, people might have had to learn a new system, but their sense of professional value generally stayed intact. And now with AI, that change is beginning to feel very personal. So, Nick's point about strengthening judgment and sense making, critical thinking is exactly right because those are the capabilities that help people regain agency in change. And when people can still see where they add value, where their unique and individual perspective matters, they adapt faster. And when they can't retain that sense of identity, that's where fear starts to show up. So, from a change lens, learning velocity is about how quickly people can reorient who they are and how they contribute as the ground keeps shifting and moving and feeling very tumultuous around them.
Those are great perspectives. I love it there. I mean, you both are talking about identity and there is a bit of fear involved there, and specifically in the guide, it calls out fear, especially fear of failure as a huge blocker. So curious here, is that new or is AI just making it louder?
I don't think that the fear of failure is new. It's very much a part of work. It's definitely a part of change. Um, but I do think that AI is turning up the volume. We actually found this in our leadership mindsets research last year. There is a whole lot of fear that leaders are having to lead with right now. One of the things that I don't think we talk about enough is the psychological effect of AI being so polished and being so fast and being so confident. Of course, that's going to showcase a whole load of fear. Um, when a tool can produce an answer instantly, and let's be honest, often pretty well, it subtly shifts our expectations. So, what we're seeing is that we're risking becoming a little less tolerant of messiness and half formed thinking, and of course, other people's mistakes, which we know are so very essential if we're ever going to grow. I think, even within my own team, something that I've noticed is AI denting their confidence. So people have started second guessing their own judgment, or they're holding back their own voice because the machine sounds so certain. And to me, that's the fear that I have. That's the risk that we're facing right now. Not that AI is too good, um, but actually because we're not recalibrating what good human contribution looks like. So we've got the idea of tolerance being lower, of hesitation being higher. And of course, we need to acknowledge that AI is still new. It's new to everyone. No one has decades of experience to fall back on. So we're all learning in real time, in public. And yeah, we're doing all of this under a whole lot of pressure. So, of course, that fear is real. Um, the challenge that we've got is that right now we risk writing people off because of that fear. So, what we're experiencing is we're seeing them hold back, but what looks like resistance, that's just caution. And what looks like disengagement right now is actually self protection. So, stop writing people off because they've got that fear. That fear is keeping us safe. What we need to do is organizations actively making space for that fear, for that learning, for that experimentation, and of course, that imperfect thinking, because we don't want people defaulting to playing it safe. That's where my fear starts to show up.
Yeah, yeah, it's wild. We usually think tech is the hard part, but what I'm hearing and feeling for you both is often the psychology is that real gatekeeper there. You're seeing people potentially being afraid of failure and not really experimenting in there. Cheryl, I'm curious your perspective on this.
Yeah, I love that messaging that technology is rarely the true constraint here. Technology exists, we have that, it's going to keep up, it's going to continue to push us, but are we prepared as a workforce, as a society, from a psychological standpoint, and our leaders keeping up with that? So most organizations that I work with, they already have access to AI. We're not introducing something that doesn't already exist, whether they're working with it at the office or not, they're definitely engaging with it at home. So many people have it on their phones and they engage with it without even knowing it in so many ways. They're reaching for it um, without us needing to push them. But what slows things down isn't that capability, but rather that hesitation to trust the use of that capability in those situations where it really matters. People are watching closely. They're trying to figure out what's safe and what's expected and what happens if I get it wrong in this situation? So they may be practicing and playing at home, getting really comfortable with it, but what does that look like? How does that translate into the workforce, into the workplace? And we're starting to see that's where the fear of failure starts to show up. So not as open resistance, but as a quiet self-protection, as Nick mentioned. And that intensifies when it's fast and AI is confident and it's highly visible. We're talking about it a lot. And so messy thinking suddenly begins to feel riskier. I can't just bring unpolished ideas forward because AI sounds beautiful when it's presenting these ideas to me. So we have to create a safe space for that. And leaders must set the environment. They have to lead the charge in that area, thinking out loud, talking out loud, bringing it to the table, sharing their own fears and hesitations, and bringing a little bit of messy work to the table. Not everything can be polished all of the time. So that's where the psychology really starts to come in, and we're looking at it from both angles. We have to think of the individuals, not just the technology.
Yeah. So now I will say this, Nick, the guide highlights four leadership mindsets for the AI era here. So growth, inclusiveness, agility, and then enterprise. So from your perspective, which one is tripping up leaders the most right now?
That's a tough one. And I guess it is going to be different for everyone, but I think from what I've seen, if I had to pick one, and I've got a colleague who's going to be quietly devastated by this because it's her favorite mindset, if you can have a favorite mindset. But I'd say it's the enterprise one. This is what leaders are struggling with right now. So, an enterprise mindset, enterprise thinking is very much about belonging to something bigger than yourself. It's about making decisions with the whole organization in mind, not just advocating for your own function or your own priority or agenda. I think if I compare it to other mindsets like growth and inclusive, well, they feel far more accessible right now because they're personal. They sit closely. It's me, it's my team. But enterprise thinking is asking something very different. It's asking leaders to lift their gaze up, to step out of their comfort zone and think about that wider system. And of course, that's exactly where AI is starting to complicate things, we could say. What we're recognizing is that AI can churn through all of our business data and it can come up with all these optimized processes, which is great. But it doesn't carry the weight of the organization in the way that our human leaders are. It doesn't have to live with the consequences of a short term decision. It doesn't have to feel the tension between, what's sufficient now and what's sustainable over time. That responsibility sits squarely within our enterprise mindset. The challenge that we've got right now is that leaders aren't necessarily embracing it. What they're doing is they're retreating to their own areas of expertise. And it's not because they're choosing to be siloed, it's more that our uncertainty just keeps pulling us back to what's familiar. So, a bit like what Cheryl was just saying, when things feel unstable, we double down into our immediate needs or the things that we know are our strengths because that's our protective response. The problem is that if leaders stop thinking beyond their own patch, we're going to start to get pockets of efficiency As much as we're going to start to get pockets of duplication, misalignment, and of course, competing priorities that nobody wants to take ownership for. So, I guess in the white knuckled ride of transformation, the enterprise mindset is about grabbing the brakes for a little bit. It's pausing for a second and asking different questions of our leaders. What does this mean from the organization as a whole? Who else is going to be affected by this? Where do we actually need to align rather than just execute? So, the leaders that are surviving well right now or thriving well right now are joining the dots between teams. They're slowing down the system just enough to make sure that their decisions are genuinely serving the whole rather than just the immediate.
I'm just pausing here to make sure that was solid there. So I'm trying to track with that overall script, and so we're just having a little break in here. So I apologize. Okay. All right. So you've used some pretty unconventional methods, Nic. Escape rooms, nudges to spark behavior change. I'm curious, why do those work so well, especially when the pace is fast?
That they work so well in fast moving environments because that's when people stop thinking deliberately and they start to fall back on habit. When pace is fast, none of us have the headspace for abstract models or long explanations. So, what we tend to do is what we've always done. And of course, if we're looking to change behavior, it's those exact moments where we're falling back to what's natural to us that we need to work with. We can't just schedule everything for a classroom or put it all on a slide deck. So what we've found is that approaches like gamified escape rooms, they work because we're not telling people what good behavior looks like. We're actually getting them to experience it. You know, how you communicate, how you make decisions, how you involve others or don't involve others when time is tight. These are the bits that really stay with people. It's the learning that lands because it feels earned rather than instructed. And I'm super passionate about nudges. I talk about them all the time, but nudges work for the same reason. They're not relying on your memory. They're kind of about a moment of motivation. So they show up in the workplace, they create just enough of a pause to help someone notice what they're about to do and showcase that there could be a different call. I think what matters right now is because we're operating so quickly, and we've got a lot of change to carry on our shoulders, if we're honest, we're really overloaded. So, nudges and behavioral focused interventions are great because they're stopping us from focusing just on efficiency and output and keeping up. And what they're actually doing is they're helping us pause and think, what should I be doing? Yes, the noise and the pressure is pulling me this way, but am I actually sacrificing my good intent because of that? So, unconventional approaches are very much cutting through the work, cutting through the noise, because they're working with our human behaviors rather than against them. They are all about creating that fast feedback, that very real reflection, and enough friction to help people spot that they could be doing something else. So, if I'm honest, that's how behavior is going to change, not because somebody understands something intellectually. It's because they're catching themselves out and they're thinking, actually, I could do this differently next time.
Okay, Nick. So, what does real psychological safety look like today in an AI driven world?
As psychological safety needs a bit of a rethink right now. So, if we're talking about what it needs to be today, it's less about everyone feeling comfortable and more about people feeling able. So, able to ask the question without worrying whether it makes them look bad, able to say, actually, I'm just not there yet, and able to challenge an output even when the text sounds confident, as we've already discussed. A lot of this is going to come down to what leaders do next. And Cheryl's already alluded to this. If leaders are hesitating in their AI adoption and they're trying to get fluent in private, like Cheryl said, at home, at night, when people can't see it, teams are going to follow that example. So that uncertainty that we're all experiencing suddenly becomes something we have to hide rather than something we should be working through together. And that's very much why I say to leaders, you need to lull, not laugh out loud, but learn out loud. So share with your teams those clanger moments and say to them, yeah, I ran this through AI. It's not quite sitting right. Can we just talk this through together? Or, yeah, this saved me loads of time, but I think it's lost the nuance. What am I missing? But these moments are what truly matter right now. They are learning out loud. They show that the real value is still sitting with the human. They are sending a very, very clear signal that questioning isn't risky, it's expected. So I think that, when leaders are visible in their learning, what they're experimenting with, what didn't work. It's absolutely giving permission for their team to lean in rather than retreat. So I guess, Michael, going back to your question, my short answer would be psychological safety today is about creating empowerment in everyday moments. It's making it genuinely okay to say, I don't think AI has this right. So psychological safety isn't about removing the pressure. It's about removing the fear that we spoke of. We need to stop rescuing our teams and start resourcing our teams.
That is amazing, amazing stuff. I love a new definition for lull, learn out loud. And just hearing what you're saying, there's so many moments when I've interacted with leaders and felt that same power when somebody mentions it and they're like, "Well, I've got this. It's not quite right in a proposal phase. What do you all think?" And then you start bringing that human wisdom in there. I think that's great.
So, what I really like about this new way of thinking about AI and how it integrates with psychological safety is what Nick talked about, bringing it into the discussion, just like you would a colleague. So we don't just have this AI running in the background, bringing things forward, but let's bring it into the conversation and talk about. I ran this through AI, and it came up with some ideas I didn't think about. What do you think about that? Do we need to integrate this differently versus just adding it into the workflow and pretending like it never happened? Oh, yeah, these were my my words. Not that we say it like that, but we don't necessarily talk about it or bring it in all the time, and it can be used as a new partner, a new teammate, someone that's on our team that needs to be part of the conversation, and the more that we do that, the more comfortable we're gonna get, and it doesn't feel like something that we're doing sneaky or behind the scenes, or where do I balance that these were my thoughts versus their thoughts? How do we talk about that openly and freely? And I think that's a big part of the conversation.
That is so funny. I mean, you almost feel sometimes like, oh, back in school when we were young, you almost feel like, oh, is this that smart person that somebody paid to do their homework for them? But from hearing you both, it's like, hey, let's not be ashamed of it. Let's bring it out front. We ran this idea. I had an idea. You had an idea. What do you think about it? Let's all talk critically about this. And it's a new teammate that's got some special abilities, but it doesn't have the human wisdom. It doesn't have the divining power in there. And that brings me to my next question. This one's for Dr. Cheryl. And you've mentioned something about there's been a pretty long band of change over time. So you've personally seen 20 years of tech driven change. You're like me. We're people that were here before Google came about here. So curious though, Dr. Cheryl, from your perspective, what feels different about the AI change?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen it come a long way, and there are some fundamental ways that AI is changing the way that we're working and how we're bringing it into the workplace. How it's disrupting things slightly different than our typical technological pathway and what we've managed before. First, we mentioned this earlier. It challenges our professional identity in ways that we haven't seen before. Past transformations have mostly changed the way that work gets done, and AI changes who feels valuable and how they feel valuable. what I'm contributing to the workforce now looks a little bit differently, and I need to figure out how I want to fit into this picture. And when a tool can, write and analyze or recommend, people start questioning where their judgment is, how I fit in, and like what we were just talking about. Does it threaten my contributions? Do I need to claim some of this intelligence, or can I say, I had a partner in this? It feels different when you're talking about a machine versus, I worked with Nic on this and this is what we came up with. It almost feels like we're cheating. And I don't know what that means for me in the workplace. So that feels different. Second, the pace really breaks that traditional change model. We used to design and then we would pilot, we would start rolling out maybe in waves and bring people along. And then we would go through a stabilization period and we would call implementation fairly complete. Well, AI is evolving weekly. It's introducing new technology, new capability. We're finding new ways of working, and it's flowing out in a pattern that we haven't seen before. We're not necessarily waiting at work, and we don't leave it at work when we go home. We're bringing knowledge that we've found outside of what we've been taught in the classroom or what we've learned at work. This isn't a system used for HR or for our learning tools. This is something that I use across the board in every aspect of my life, and that's changing very quickly. So the future state keeps moving. So instead of managing a transition per se, we're managing continuous sense making. And it's really change in what we would call a permanent beta. Third, adoption is already happening with or without leader permission. They're not driving it, they're not opening the door for it. We're really trying to run behind and keep up. So people are using AI because it helps them. They want to get in front of it. That creates this gap between high adoption and low alignment. We're not necessarily all on the same page as we're kicking it off. So change management used to drive adoption. Now it has to channel it through guardrails, shared principles, and this foundation of trust. And in many cases, we're scrambling to keep up and really like set up some barriers and bounce people back onto this pathway as the map keeps moving. But at the same time, we're laying down a trail of M&Ms for those that aren't really interested to like bring them along. Come take that first step with us. Join us on this trail. So we have this wide range of extremes in terms of the adoption pathway. So the role of change leaders is shifting. We're no longer just helping people accept this solution. We're helping them continuously adapt without burning out or losing their sense of value along the way.
I love it. A trail of M&Ms. You've just hit this so perfectly. There's so many times where you're like, you've got people that are in, this is the Wild West, right? People are out there, they're using the Claudes, the Geminis. My daughter's telling me to use an AI that is uses eco-friendly electricity, where and then it's like, okay, which one is my organization approving? And like, yeah, and then there's some people that are lagging. Boy, I love I love what you're saying there. The trail of M&Ms. It's so perfect. I love it. Okay, so here's the thing. You talk in the guide here, Cheryl, about change readiness and I guess you could say resilience as true capabilities here. So, what does actually building them look like?
Michael, this is one of my absolute favorite topics, and it expands so
Absolutely.
far beyond the workplace. Change readiness and resilience are some of the most underestimated strengths organizations can build. And they're not just about getting folks through disruption. They're actually a competitive advantage all on their own without the existence of change having to be in place for them to be so powerful. The organizations that move the fastest are the ones that invested long before they actually had to, before they felt that pull, by creating the cultures where people feel supported. They're integrating learning as part of the job, as Nic talked about, and developing a strong sense of trust between leaders and teams. long before we started having, quote, a reason to need to build that trust. They're doing because it's the right thing to do and because it builds those strong relationships and teams. So, one big misconception I see is the idea that readiness comes from training, from preparing people for the specific tool or activity. Readiness comes from in creating a sense of meaning. So, what does that look like in practice? Well, first, it starts with context. People don't just resist change, they resist what that change might mean for them. So, leaders need to be clear about what's changing, what isn't, what's still unknown, the uncertainties that we have before us, and what we're working through together in real time. Even imperfect clarity helps people really steady themselves and move forward because I know I can trust you to tell me that you're challenged too or that we don't have all the answers. Don't pretend like you have all the answers when I know we don't have all the answers here. So secondly, we have to accept that change isn't this one-time event. Resilience today is about staying effective when things keep shifting. And that means really talking honestly about fatigue and learning curves and the fact that some things won't work the first time. It means designing work with the assumption that there will be ongoing adjustments instead of pretending that stability is just around the corner and it's this goal we're trying to get to. Third, we need to shift from training to building this confidence in people. People feel ready when they believe they can figure things out. I've got the capability, I've got the base knowledge, I have everything that I need to be able to do this successfully, even if I don't have all the answers right now. And think, I love analogies. Think about teaching a baby to walk. We don't cheer as soon as they've walked across the room. We get really excited when they just pull up on the couch. And then when they start to lift their leg for the first time, we go crazy. We cheer, we lift them up, and we encourage every movement in the right direction, every step along the way. Even if they end up falling down, we said that was such a good move. And adults, we're the same way. We wanna know that we're moving along the right pathway, that you noticed that we took that step, and even though, our foot was off the side a little bit, we still got that movement in the right direction. We need that encouragement too. And then finally, leaders who model the trying, the failing, and the successes, all of those movements along the way. People don't become resilient because leaders look confident, look like they have all the answers, and are modeling the perfect way of doing it. They become resilient because leaders are human, just like them. And learning out loud is really important to bringing others along with you.
Yeah, I'm hearing from both of you is really actually embrace the human messiness. You're actually bringing a tear to my eye thinking about my two daughters. One's 20 at time of recording. One is about 18, and just going back to exactly celebrating that walking, the learning, the just every little bit of it. And that's such a great analogy to where we're at here, where you're not admitting perfection, or you're not expecting it from your staff. It's just, that's a great analogy. I love that, and learning out loud. I'm picking up so much here. So let's talk about the cultural dimension of AI here. So, Cheryl, from your perspective, where do organizations underestimate the cultural side of AI the most?
Well, in short, Michael, yes. As a whole, the cultural side of AI is undervalued and underestimated. But if I had to choose the most underestimated cultural element, I would say it's these informal norms. So, in our effort to catch up, we're generally pretty good at creating training and setting guardrails and building policy. And all of those things are important, rightfully so. We need to be doing those things. We spend a lot of time there, but those things don't actually tell people how to behave day to day, how it fits in, what that looks like, and building confidence. So, what really drives adoption is what people experience. It's the language leaders use. It's what happens when someone questions an AI output. It's whether trying something new is quietly encouraged or quietly discouraged or punished. People are watching very closely and they learn from who gets praised and who gets corrected and what leaders model when things really don't go perfectly and seamlessly. So while policies are setting the boundaries, informal norms decide the behavior. And culture shows up really between those rules. And that's often where AI adoption either accelerates or ultimately stalls.
Hey, I'd say that the most stalling comes from the messy middle. So somewhere between the sort of big ambition and the everyday work. If we think of an organization, at the top of the organization, there's generally that clear intent. We need to adopt AI, we need to move faster, and we need to work differently. All sounds great. And on the front line, of course, we've got plenty of activity. People are busy and tools are being used. But as Cheryl's already mentioned, transformation is going to happen either way with or without leadership. But with that messy middle, what actually happens is staff start using tools, but they're not always knowing why they're using them. Without that strong middle management for leadership, we're starting to see that decisions and priorities, well, they're kind of slipping down the agenda because people don't know what they're deciding for, and leaders don't feel confident in making the calls in this new unfamiliar space. So I'm afraid I call us middle managers that mess in the middle, because if we're not equipped, if we're not out there in the front, exactly as Cheryl says, it's going to happen without us, but things just don't happen as smoothly. So I think what we're recognizing is the organizations that aren't investing in that middle leadership level, they're starting to see very little joined up progress. You know, different teams are always going to interpret the same change differently. AI, yeah, is going to get embedded into existing processes, but it isn't really reshaping them. It's just layering on top. So, what we need are leaders out front, because otherwise, what's happening with the stalling isn't because of the lack of adoption, it's the lack of integration. So, that very much comes back to my earlier answer of why enterprise mindsets are so very important. We need that joined up thinking, because the leaders who are making the difference right now are the ones who can translate the organizational intent into the day-to-day reality for their teams and the teams next to them. They're the ones that are connecting the strategy to the workflow, and they're helping people understand not just what to use, people will figure that out themselves, but why they're using it and how it fits. So without that leadership layer, it's never going to be learning velocity. At best, it's going to be learning that levels off. And I have to be honest, speaking from prior experience, once that change, that momentum starts to plateau like that, it's so incredibly hard to get the energy back. So focus on your middle layer first.
Yeah, well, Nick did a beautiful job of laying this out, and what I'll add is that when leaders aren't equipped, what stalls is trust, and that trust is so fundamental to taking it to the next step and allowing others to feel like they have the right and the ability to be able to implement their own version of what we're asking them to do with AI. And to build on the concept of adoption here, people are generally willing to try new tools. We do it all the time. This is not something new for us. There are lines 3 blocks long anytime a new phone comes out. People are waiting, they're excited to try the next type of technology. And there's a year-long wait for a new car that has some new capabilities, driverless cars. Some of us are a little slow to accept the new technology, but over time, we want to try these new things. We want the latest gadgets. What they don't have is this shared understanding of what good looks like right now. And without that, likelihood of failure increases and the desire to take that risk wanes. No one wants to put themselves in a situation where they're going to fail, especially if that failure is public or affects their livelihood. So, change stalls when leaders can't translate intent into everyday decision making, when priorities stay unclear and those trade offs stay unspoken.
Yeah, well said from both of you, no doubt there. So, question here is, if learning velocity is the goal, then what's one leadership or change behavior that unlocks momentum?
If I could download one behavior, it would definitely be visible decision making. So, the idea right now is that leaders need to shift from giving all the answers to actually sharing how they're thinking, taking people on that journey with them. For a long time, we've rewarded the idea of the hero leader, the one who steps in and makes the call and protects the team and keeps things moving. So, of course, leaders' instincts right now are to really double down on that behavior because we haven't rewritten the playbook. But actually, hero leadership is creating these blockages, it's slowing progress down. So the idea of sharing our thinking and our decision making is in recognition that yeah, our teams are busy, but they're just getting carried away with the tide rather than choosing how to swim. What we need them to do is understand why decisions are being made, to think about what's driving our priorities, and quite honestly, what's still open for discussion. Get them empowered. As I mentioned earlier, it's about resourcing them. So the behavior that very much unlocks the movement that we need right now is saying things like, this is where I'm going to prioritize this. This is what I'm parking just now. But importantly, this is why I'm thinking that way. Being clear about where teams can have the freedom to act, but where alignment really matters. That's the bit that's going to unlock this learning velocity. And what I would say is sharing your thinking won't remove all of the uncertainty. It can't, but it can help to shift our teams from the idea of threat into agency.
I love that. Cheryl, what's your perspective on that?
I echo this in its entirety, and I think you'll see a theme here of visible leadership. In change management, leader visibility, sharing consistent messaging, talking about the effort, being front and center with those that are going through the change is absolutely critical and one of the key drivers to success in any change initiative. And in this setting where Nic talked quite a bit about visible decision making, I kind of refer to it as visible sense making, and it's what we've been talking about
Mm,
throughout is sharing this journey together, giving that organization that orientation, so that people are more confident moving into that next stage. Without that orientation, people hesitate, they overcheck, they wait, and they ultimately default to what feels safest. And that means sometimes relying too heavily on technology and sometimes avoiding it altogether. So when we can go through that together, when I know my leader is with me, when I'm seeing them go through it together, then that creates that sense of confidence and helps me know where those boundaries are.
oh, well said. I love it. Visible sense making, learning out loud. So many great things here. So, we've had a great discussion. So, let's end on a hopeful note here. Okay. What gives you both, I guess you could say, genuine optimism about where organizations are headed?
I'm definitely an optimist. So I would say the bit that I'm super excited right now are the fact that organizations are starting to take learning seriously again. Not as an event, but as an ongoing capability. For so long, learning has been something that we scheduled around the real work. But what we're seeing now is organizations are realizing that people can't adapt while they're working, then they're just not going to keep up. You know, the change that I've been experiencing with our clients is we've gone from pretending everything's okay and learning can be an offshoot. What we're now having is very honest conversations where we're saying everything is not under control. What we need to do right now is evolve, and I need my people to build that muscle to evolve with it. So it's a very different posture to how we've been talking about learning and development in the past. We're not trying to predict and perfect everything up front. So I am very much saying that my optimism isn't coming from the idea that organizations have cracked this. They haven't. But it is coming from a real excitement that they're accepting that the work is very much around helping their staff to be better learners. And that goes for their leaders too. This spotlight is showing up in a very different way to how it has before.
And what gives me optimism is that more organizations are recognizing the value of employee well-being and establishing that the employee experience matters. And as we're going through this phase of continuous change and recognizing that stability is not something that we're aiming for, it's not an outcome that we're shooting for. Almost like when we kind of went through our COVID experience, and we said we want to get back to the way things were. No, this is the new normal, and the new normal is continuous change. That there's going to be fluctuation. We started to adapt to that and building cultures that allow employees to feel confident in the lack of stability in many cases. So we're starting to hear organizations ask about, how do I develop a continuous learning culture? That's a new question that hasn't always been at the forefront of conversations, to where I want my folks to be adaptable and resilient and ready for the next wave of change. We're getting in front of it, and those conversations are starting to happen more frequently. They're asking the right questions, they're having the right mindset in place, and they're thinking about people as critical parts of their organization, as a competitive advantage, which we've always been in terms of capability, but also how do we take that mindset into that competitive advantage landscape? And those are the right questions, and that is a powerful shift. And it's really the foundation for real learning velocity.
I love that. And that kind of brings us full circle in terms of thinking of this as a behavioral change as much as a technology driven one.
Nic, Cheryl, this was the perfect way to wrap up the Learning Velocity sessions. I'd like to thank you both for investing the time, carving out a time of your busy day here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Listeners, thank you for tuning in to the award-winning Performance Matters podcast, brought to you by GP Strategies, the Learning Velocity Company. For 60 years, we've helped organizations build capability with the speed, relevance, and quality that make real performance possible. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.